The champagne glass didn't just fall. Damien Valenti placed it down with deliberate calm, adjusted his cufflink, and looked out at 400 people who had spent the evening celebrating a marriage he was about to publicly execute. "I want to be honest with all of you tonight," he said into the microphone. His voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had never once been told no. "Elena has been a good woman, a loyal wife, but I have never been in love with her. Not once. Not for a single day in 10 years. The ballroom went silent the way a room goes silent when something irreversible has just happened. 7 months pregnant, Elena Marcelli Valenti stood 12 feet away. She didn't scream. She didn't reach for him. She didn't collapse against the nearest senator's wife or press her hand to her mouth the way the room clearly expected her to. She touched her stomach once, just once, and the look on her face wasn't the look of a woman destroyed. It was something quieter than that, and somehow much worse. If you have ever stood in a room full of people and realized that the person who was supposed to be your home has just chosen to burn it down in front of witnesses, then you already know exactly what Elena Valenti felt in that moment. And if you haven't watched closely, because what happens next will show you what a woman is truly made of when everything she was promised turns out to have been a performance. Subscribe to this channel and follow this story to the end. Hit that like button and drop your city and country. In the comments, I want to see how far this story travels. And don't go anywhere, because what Elena does before sunrise tonight will change everything. The party had been Damien's idea. Elisa had suggested something smaller, a dinner at home, perhaps the terrace overlooking the bay where they had eaten together on their first anniversary, before the empire grew so large that privacy became a liability. She had mentioned it 3 times in the weeks before the date, each time choosing a moment when Damien was not distracted by his phone or his lawyers or the particular brand of restless energy that had been radiating off him for the past 5 months like heat off summer asphalt. Each time he had nodded without really hearing her. The ballroom at the Valenti Grand was his answer. 400 guests. 12-course dinner. A commemorative video playing on a 40-foot screen. 10 years of photographs, curated by someone on his events team, who didn't know which memories were real and which ones had been staged for the cameras. Senators, bankers. Old money that went back 4 generations. New money that had been laundering itself through legitimate business long enough to start believing its own story. Elena had worn a midnight blue gown because it was the only formal dress that still fit properly at 7 months. And because blue had always made Damien stop and look at her the way he had looked at her when they were 26 and reckless, and neither of them yet understood the cost of the life they were building. She had told herself it was a good sign that she still wanted him to look at her that way. She had been wrong about a lot of things. The evening started well enough, which in retrospect should have worried her. Damien was charming and attentive in the early hours, moving through the crowd, with the particular grace of a man who had spent decades understanding exactly how much space he was allowed to take up in any given room. He brought her sparkling water without being asked. He rested his hand briefly on the small of her back when they greeted the Castellano family. He leaned close once and said her name in a low voice, and for a moment she thought maybe she had been manufacturing distance that didn't exist. Maybe the last 5 months of silences and closed doors and unanswered questions had been her own anxiety feeding on itself. Then she saw Celeste Rourke standing near the East Bar, wearing a dress the color of bone, holding a glass she wasn't drinking from, watching Damien the way a person watches something they've already decided belongs to them. Elena had known about Celeste the way you know about a bruise, before you press it, aware of the tenderness, choosing not to test the depth. Celeste had been in Damien's life before Elena. They had ended badly, or at least that was the version Damien had given her. And Elena had accepted it the way a 26-year-old woman accepts the complicated histories of complicated men, because she believed love was capable of rendering the past irrelevant. 10 years of evidence suggested she had been mistaken about that, too. She watched Damien cross the room. She watched him take Celeste's untouched drink from her hand and replace it with a fresh one. She watched them speak in the way people speak, when the conversation is not really a conversation, but a continuation of something that never actually stopped. Elena turned back to Senator Whitmore's wife, who was telling a story about their grandchildren's school play, and she listened carefully and responded in all the right places, and behind her eyes something went very still. The toasts came an hour later. Damien's business partner, Griffin Hale, spoke first something warm and practiced about partnership and loyalty that sounded genuine until you noticed he was reading from his phone. Then Damien's sister Mara, who had never much liked Elena, but delivered a toast that was polite enough to pass. Then a federal judge, whose name Elena could never remember, said something about legacy. And then Damien took the microphone. She knew something was wrong before he opened his mouth. Not because of anything dramatic, no hardening of his jaw, no meaningful pause, no cinematic signal. He just looked at her once, directly, and what she saw in his expression was the specific blankness of a man who has already made his decision and is no longer negotiating with himself about it. I want to be honest with all of you tonight. The room quieted. Damien spoke with the same measured calm he used in boardrooms when he was delivering news that would cost someone their livelihood. She had always respected that quality in him, the ability to say difficult things without losing control. She had not anticipated that he would one day use it on her. Elena has been a good woman, he paused, a loyal wife. A devoted partner in everything I built. But I owe the people in this room, people who matter to me, the truth. Another pause, shorter this time, as if he had rehearsed the rhythm. I have never been in love with her, not once. Not for a single day in 10 years of marriage. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. Elena could hear Crystal somewhere to her left, the faint hum of the ventilation system, the particular absence of 400 people simultaneously choosing not to breathe. I am going back to Celeste Rourke, Damien continued. She was always where I should have been. And this marriage, which should never have happened, is over. Senator Whitmore's wife had stopped talking mid-sentence. Somewhere behind Elena, a woman made a soft sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a word. Griffin Hale was staring at the floor with the fixed concentration of a man who had been warned and was now waiting for the part where it was appropriate to react. Elena did not move. She was aware of her body in the specific, hyper-conscious way you become aware of your body when it is the only thing you can control. The weight of the child inside her. The temperature of the room against her bare shoulders. The fact that her hands were perfectly steady at her sides, which surprised her, because her heartbeat was doing something irregular and loud. She touched her stomach, not dramatically, not for the room. Simply because it was the most honest thing she could do. In that moment, acknowledge the other person present, the small one, the one who would be born into whatever happened next. If that is truly what you want, Elena said, clearly enough that the nearest tables could hear her, then I hope you find it. She turned and walked toward the exit. People stepped back. Not quickly, there was nothing panicked about the crowd, only the instinct to create space, to not be too close to the epicenter of something this irreversible. She passed Senator Whitmore without looking at him. She passed Griffin Hale, who said her name once very quietly, and she kept walking, because there was nothing he could offer her that she needed. The lobby was cool after the ballroom. Her heels were loud on the marble. One of Damien's security team fell into step 20 feet behind her, which she ignored. Her own driver, Antonio, was already pulling the sedan around. She had texted him from the ballroom 2 minutes before Damien finished speaking, because she had understood where he was going before he finished the sentence. She had not until that moment realized she had already known. On some level, for longer than tonight. You don't carry that kind of stillness into a moment like that without having rehearsed it in some part of your mind you hadn't been ready to fully acknowledge. The rain outside was cold and specific against her face when she pushed through the doors. Autumn had come in hard this year, and the city smelled like wet stone and something burning far away. Antonio had the door open before she reached the car. He didn't say anything. He was a good man who understood that some moments don't want company. She sat in the back and watched the ballroom entrance through the window. The door did not open again. Damien did not follow. She had not expected him to, but the absence of it still landed somewhere in the middle of her chest with the particular weight of things that are confirmed rather than discovered. Home, she said. Antonio drove. The city moved past the windows in wet light and shadow, and Elena sat with her hands folded over her stomach and thought not about Damien, not yet, but about her father. Marco Marcelli had died 4 years into her marriage, in the quiet wing of a hospital that cost more per day than most people earned in a month. He had not been a gentleman in the way people mean when they use that word as a compliment. He was exacting and impatient, and had very specific ideas about how things ought to be done, but he had loved Elena with the particular ferocity of a man. who has no sons, and has therefore chosen to give his only daughter every tool he possesses. He had also not trusted Damien Valenti. He had said so exactly once, which was his way he named a thing, made his position clear, and then trusted you to carry the information yourself. He is not a man who has learned to want something he hasn't earned, Marco had told her 2 days before the wedding. He's learned to take. Those look the same from a distance. They're not the same thing. She had been 26. She had thought she knew better. She had thought love was capable of teaching a man things that experience had failed to, and she had been wrong about that in the same slow, accumulating way you are wrong about something you wanted too much to examine honestly. Marco had died without reopening the conversation. But he had left her other things. The car pulled through the estate gates. The mansion was dark except for the nursery wing, where she had left a light on out of habit, and the library, where her housekeeper misses. Aldane sometimes stayed late reading. Elena went upstairs. The nursery smelled like wood, and something soft. She had been particular about paint, and hadn't let the interior designer choose the color. Had mixed it herself from 2 separate samples until she arrived at something she could only describe as the color of calm. The crib was already assembled. The small dresser was already full of folded things in every shade of pale. She turned the wedding portrait on the shelf face down. Not with anger, with the particular exhaustion of someone, removing something that has stopped being true. Then she went to the antique cabinet her father had sent from his estate 2 weeks before he died, which she had assumed at the time was simply one of those gestures old men make when they begin settling accounts. She had placed it in the nursery because it fit the space and because she liked having something of his nearby. She opened the false back. Marco had built it himself, which she had discovered only 6 months after his death when the estate attorney mentioned it in passing during a documentation review. She had assumed she'd already found everything: the journals, the trust papers, the letters. She had not assumed the cabinet. She had opened it then and sat for a long time with what was inside, and then she had closed it again and thought very carefully about what it meant. Now she removed the fireproof case. Inside, 6 leather journals in Marco's handwriting, dense and cross-referenced, covering 30 years of business decisions and the reasoning behind each one. A silver key on a black ribbon, etched with a serial number she had memorized. An original trust charter for the Marcelli Continuity Trust, dated 16 years before her marriage. And a letter, unsealed, with her name on the front in her father's handwriting. She did not read the letter again. She had read it 4 times since she found it. She knew what it said. Someone has mistaken your silence for surrender. The day you need this, you will know what to do with it. She set the letter aside, opened the trust charter to the authorization page, took the pen from the inner pocket of the case, her father's pen, a heavy thing, the kind they stopped making, and signed her name in the designated field. Then she reached for her phone and called the number she had programmed in and never used. It rang twice. Ms. Marcelli. The voice on the other end was alert, despite the hour, which told her the attorney had been expecting this call for some time. Are you ready to proceed? Activate the continuity trust, Elena said. Full standing authorization. Execute the freeze on all unauthorized transactions, effective immediately. A pause. This will be irreversible once. I know what it will be, she said. Execute it. Yes, ma'am. She hung up 2:13 a.m. The Marcelli Continuity Trust went active. Every transaction Damien Valenti had authorized in the past 18 months, without her co-signature, every asset movement, every pledged collateral, every account transfer touching infrastructure her father had provided the foundation for froze. Not destroyed, not stolen, frozen. Suspended in place, requiring her authorization to move an inch in any direction. Elena returned the case to the cabinet. She sat in the nursing chair, the one she'd bought, before she knew whether the baby would come early or late, or whether the whole thing would dissolve into loss. The way she'd feared during the first trimester, when the doctor's face had held that particular careful quality. She sat and she breathed, and she let the rain hit the window, and she did not cry. She was not, she realized, someone who needed to cry about this. She was someone who needed to think. The trust had been her father's architecture, built over decades, and what she had learned from the attorney after his death was something Damien had never understood. The Marcelli money had not simply been invested into Valenti capital. It had been foundational, the port infrastructure rights. the property titles in certain critical districts. The original financial guarantees that had made Damien's first major acquisition possible when he was 31 and ambitious, and needed a family like the Marcellus to take a serious look at him. Damien had accepted Marco's backing as the natural result of his own competence. It had not occurred to him to wonder what was attached to it. Men like Damien, Elena had observed over 10 years, had difficulty believing that what they'd been given was anything other than what they deserved. For a decade, she had let him believe that. She was no longer interested in protecting that particular illusion. The child moved beneath her hands, a slow, rolling motion, the kind that still astonished her, even at 7 months, even after all those appointments and the specific mathematics of trimesters and kick counts. She pressed her palm flat and felt the answering pressure back. "I know," she said quietly. "I know." She was not speaking to the room or to her father's memory or to anything philosophical. She was speaking to her daughter, who was not yet named, but who had been real to her since the first ultrasound image, that static-filled black and white thing that she had stared at, alone in the car, because Damien had been in Singapore and the appointment had been routine, and she hadn't wanted to make it a production. She had sat in the car and looked at that image for 20 minutes. She had known then, though she hadn't said it aloud, that whatever happened to her marriage, this child was the clearest, most undeniable thing she had ever done. She was not going to let anyone use that against her. At 4:30 in the morning, she finally heard a car on the gravel, Damien returning, the familiar rhythm of the gates, the engine note. She listened to him enter the house, heard him go to the master suite, heard, after a brief silence, him try the library door, which she had locked. He did not knock. He went back to the master suite and did not emerge. She fell asleep in the chair, which was not comfortable but was sufficient, and she woke 2 hours later with the specific, clear-eyed alertness of someone who has made a decision that has settled rather than one that has merely been made. She showered and dressed and went down to the kitchen, where Mrs. Haldane was already making coffee with the careful efficiency of someone who had read the room and decided that normalcy was the most useful thing she could offer. "I'll need the car at 8, Elena said. "Yes, ma'am." Elena sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and her phone and started going through emails, and that was where Damien found her 40 minutes later, still in his evening clothes, tie loose, looking like a man who had not slept but had spent several hours doing something more uncomfortable than sleeping. He looked at her across the kitchen. She looked back at him. "You activated the trust," he said. "Yes, that was within my rights. My attorney confirms it." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat in it heavily, like something had gone out of his legs. He put both hands flat on the table. He had the particular look of a man who has been preparing for one kind of conversation and has arrived to find a completely different one, has already started without him. "Elena, I'm not going to argue with you about last night," she said. "If you'd like to discuss the trust, you can speak with my attorney. His number is in your contacts. I don't want to talk about the trust. Then I'm not sure what you think we have to discuss. You can't just start it again. You could destroy everything. Everything I built, everything the company employs. I've reviewed the transaction logs," she said. "Everything I've frozen was either fraudulent, undisclosed, or pledged without my co-authorization, which is required under the original trust agreement. The legitimate operations, the employees, the pension accounts, none of that has been touched." She paused. "I'm not trying to destroy what you built. I'm stopping you from losing it in ways you haven't explained to me." That landed differently than he expected. She could see it, the slight adjustment in his posture, the reassessment. "Someone tried to pledge Marcelli Port assets last month," she continued, "using an authorization seal that looked like mine but wasn't. I need to know if that came from inside your operation or outside it." Damien went very still. "What? You heard me." She set down her coffee. "Someone forged my seal. I'm running an independent investigation. And I've seen the financial connections between your Lorenzo acquisition and Roman Vescari's holding companies." She held his gaze. "I need to know what you know about that." He was quiet for a long time. The kitchen clock made its small sound. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the garden was doing the thing it did after rain, where everything looked briefly more real than usual. "I don't know anything about the seal," he said finally. "I believe you," she said, "which is the only reason this conversation is happening in the kitchen instead of through lawyers." She stood up. I'm not your enemy, Damien. But I'm also not the woman you stood in front of last night and discarded in front of 400 people. Those are two different things, and you need to understand the difference before you decide how to proceed. She took her coffee and her phone and went to the library. He did not follow her. The independent investigation she'd authorized the previous month carefully, quietly, through a firm Marco had used and trusted, came back with preliminary results by mid-morning. She read them in the library with the door closed and the second line of the encrypted findings open on her laptop. The forged seal was sophisticated. Not inside job, unsophisticated. It was the work of someone who had access to high-quality technical equipment and, more importantly, someone who had physical access to original Marcelli Trust documents at some point. The seal wasn't copied from a public filing. It was constructed from the original impression, which meant the forgery hadn't come from a stranger. The financial connections to Vescari were worse. Roman Vescari was not someone Elena had ever met, but she knew the name the way you know the names of things that operate at the edges of your world without ever entering the center of it. He had been in direct competition with Damien for Port Aurelia acquisition rights. 3 years ago, a contest Damien had won, or believed he'd won, with a bid that had looked aggressive at the time, and now, reading the investigator's analysis of the transaction chain, looked assisted. Assisted from the inside. She closed the laptop. She sat for a while with the specific, uncomfortable feeling of being someone who has begun to understand that a problem is considerably larger than the problem she thought she was dealing with. The champagne glass was still on the ballroom floor at the Valenti Grande. She could see it in the photographs. The society pages had already published, the shards catching the light from the chandeliers in a way that was visually striking, and the images were going everywhere. And by noon, her phone had received calls from 3 different journalists, 7 personal friends, Damien's sister Mara, the family attorney, and one number she didn't recognize that her security team traced back to a burner registered in a name that didn't exist. She did not answer the unknown number. She forwarded it to the investigation team. And she sat in her father's chair in the library, and she thought about Port Aurelia, and the forged seal, and the photograph she hadn't seen yet, but that was already somewhere in the world, taken at her last prenatal appointment, in a moment she had believed was private. She thought about what her father had said. Someone has mistaken your silence for surrender. She looked at the cabinet in the corner of her vision. She understood now what the silver key was for. She wasn't ready to use it yet, but she was going to be. Outside the library window, the city was going on with its morning, indifferent and continuous, and in the nursery upstairs, the small folded things waited in the dresser drawers, and inside Elena Marcelli's chest, something had shifted during the night into an alignment she could not have named, but recognized as permanent. Damien had made his choice in front of 400 people. Elena had made hers at 2:13 in the morning, alone in a nursery with her father's pen. The difference was this: only one of them had understood what they were choosing. And by the time the investigation team returned with the second set of findings, by the time the burner phone number came back connected to a name she recognized, by the time she understood that Celeste Rourke's reappearance in her husband's life was not simply the resurgence of an old love, but the activation of a plan that had been running for longer than she wanted to consider Elena would understand. Something her father had spent his entire life trying to show her. The most dangerous thing in any room is not the person making the most noise. It is the one who has already done their work, before anyone thought to watch them. The second set of findings arrived at 2:47 in the afternoon, while Elena was sitting at the library desk eating a bowl of soup she had barely touched and reviewing the preliminary asset inventory her attorney had compiled overnight. She read the investigator's summary once straight through without stopping. Then she set down the spoon and read it again, more slowly, the way you read something when the first pass tells you it's worse than you expected, and you need the second pass to confirm you understood correctly. She had understood correctly. The forged authorization seal had not been constructed from a copy of a public document. The impression was too precise, the depth measurements in the forensic analysis too exact. Someone had access to the original seal, the physical object, which meant someone had been inside the estate. Not briefly. Long enough to make a cast allow it to set and remove it without leaving evidence that triggered any of the security logs. The security logs that Marcus Orsini managed. She wrote the name on a notepad. underlined it once. Set the pen down. Marcus had been with Damien's security team for 11 years. He had been present at every family event, every private meeting, every arrival and departure from this house. He knew the camera schedules. He knew the rotation patterns. He knew exactly which 90-second window existed between the overnight guard's south loop and the camera sweep of the west corridor where the library was located. She did not write Marcus Orsini as the traitor on the notepad. She wrote, "Confirm," before moving. Because she was her father's daughter, and Marco Marcelli had built an empire by understanding that the difference between intelligence and accusation was the difference between a weapon and a problem. She was still sitting with that notepad when Damien knocked on the library door. It was the first time in 10 years of marriage that he had knocked. She registered that fact with the specific tired clarity of someone cataloging evidence. "Come in," she said. He looked worse than he had that morning, which she hadn't thought was possible. The evening clothes were gone. He'd changed into something dark and plain, the kind of clothes that had no associations, no occasion. He had the particular look of a man who had spent several hours alone with himself and had not enjoyed the company. He stood just inside the door. "The emergency council meeting is at 4, he said. Hale called it. "He wants both of us there, I'm aware. My attorney already confirmed." Damien looked at the notepad on the desk, at the soup she hadn't eaten, at the window behind her, where the afternoon light was coming in flat and gray. "Elena," he said, then stopped. "Say what you came to say." "I came to say that I made choices that he exhaled." Put his hands in his pockets, which was something he did when he was working against his own instincts. "I made choices that were wrong, and I said things last night that I cannot undo." "I know that." She studied him. There was nothing calculated in what he'd just said. That was the problem with it. She could read him well enough after 10 years to know the difference between Damien Valenti performing contrition and Damien Valenti experiencing it. What she was looking at now was the second thing, and it was harder to respond to. "You're right," she said. "You can't undo it." "I know. Is there something specific you need from me before the meeting? Or did you come here to feel better?" That landed. She watched it land, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way he absorbed it without defending himself, which was new enough to be notable. "I need to know what you found," he said. "About the seal." "About Vescari. Why?" "Because if Vescari is running a play against my company, I need to understand the shape of it." "Your company," she said. "That's an interesting way to frame it." He was quiet. "My attorneys will share what's legally required in the appropriate setting," Elena said. "At the council meeting, with proper documentation and witnesses." She picked up her pen again. "I'd suggest you have your own people review the Lorenzo acquisition files before 4 o'clock. Specifically the third-party guarantor records from the original bid." Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly, but the particular expression of someone watching a door they thought was locked open from the other side. He left without saying anything else. The council meeting was held in the main conference room, on the 14th floor of Valenti Capital's downtown tower. Elena arrived 3 minutes early with her attorney, David Rice, and her lead investigator, a compact woman named Farida Nasir, who had worked for Marco, and who Elena trusted in the specific, unromantic way you trust someone, because you have watched them be competent under pressure. Griffin Hale was already there with 2 lawyers and a financial analyst whose name Elena didn't catch. 3 board members, she recognized. The company's internal legal counsel. And Damien, who was standing by the window when she entered, and turned when he heard her come in with the involuntary attentiveness of a man who has spent 10 years registering that particular sound. She did not acknowledge it. She took her seat. Hale ran the meeting with the methodical energy of someone who has been managing other people's disasters for long enough that the machinery of it no longer required emotion. He laid out the situation plainly. The freeze on Marcelli-connected assets had created a liquidity crisis in the short term. Several pending transactions were blocked, and 3 foreign partners had already made contact to express concern about the stability of the company. "The first question we need to answer," Hale said, "is whether this freeze is warranted." "It is," Elena's attorney said. "I can walk through the authorization failures that triggered it." He did. The room was very quiet during the presentation. Elena watched the board members' faces, the specific, controlled expressions of people absorbing information that is both bad and, in some fundamental way, not surprising. When Rice finished, Damien's internal counsel tried two different arguments about the scope of the trust agreement and Elena's authority to act unilaterally. Farit Nasir dismantled both in the precise, unhurried way. She dismantled most things, by producing the actual documents rather than arguing about their interpretation. The trust is clear, Farida said. Any asset backed by original Marcelli capital requires co-authorization for movement. That requirement was not met for 23 of the last 31 major transactions. One of the board members, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Cho, who had been on the board since before Damien took full control, leaned forward slightly. 23, she said. Yes. In what time frame? 18 months. The room processed that number. Elena watched Damien. He was looking at the table. She could not tell if he had known or if this was new information, and that uncertainty was itself information. It meant the exposure wasn't entirely deliberate, which meant someone had been running transactions in his name that he hadn't fully tracked. There's a second issue, Elena said. Everyone looked at her. She had been quiet through the presentation, which had made people forget. She was the one who'd called the whole thing into motion. Someone attempted to pledge Marcelli port assets last month, using a forged version of my authorization seal. The forgery was sophisticated, constructed from the original physical seal, not a copied impression. That means someone with access to this estate was involved. She paused. I have a forensic report. It will be turned over to investigators today. The temperature in the room changed. Hale looked at her, then at Damien. Damien looked up. You're saying there's an inside source, he said. I'm saying the physical evidence points that direction. I'm not naming anyone yet, but you have a candidate. I have a direction. I'll follow it appropriately. Damien held her gaze for a moment. Something passed through his face that she couldn't entirely name. It wasn't gratitude exactly, but it was adjacent to the look of a man who has realized he underestimated the person sitting across from him and is now doing arithmetic about what that means. The Lorenzo acquisition, Patricia Cho said. Yes, Elena said. Walk us through it. Farida opened her files. The Lorenzo acquisition had been Damien's biggest move the previous year, a complex purchase of a shipping logistics company that had expanded his port reach significantly. What Farida's investigation had found was that the third-party guarantor in the original bid, a holding company registered in a jurisdiction with minimal transparency requirements, was connected through 3 layers of shell structures to a fund that Roman Vescari's family trust had seeded 14 months before the bid. The room was very quiet while Farida talked. Elena watched Griffin Hale. He was the one she watched, because Hale was smart enough to have known, and also smart enough to have not known, and the difference mattered enormously. Hale's face, over the course of Farida's presentation, did not show guilt. It showed the particular, appalled attention of someone learning something they hadn't known, and Elena filed that away. When Farida finished, one of Damien's lawyers began to object on technical grounds. Damien stopped him. Let it stand, Damien said. The lawyer looked at him. Let it stand, he said again. She's right. Hale looked at Damien directly. You knew about Vescari's involvement? No, Damien's voice was even. But I should have looked harder. The bid came in clean on the surface, and I wanted what it offered. That's on me. Patricia Cho sat back. She looked at Elena. What do you want, Ms. Valenti? Marcelli, Elena said. A beat. What do you want, Miss Marcelli? A transparent investigation. An independent overseer on all transactions touching Marcelli-backed assets until the investigation concludes. And full cooperation with whatever law enforcement inquiry follows from the forgery report. She folded her hands on the table. I'm not trying to destroy this company. There are 1,100 people employed by it who had nothing to do with any of this. I intend to protect them. Hale exhaled slowly. And Damien's role going forward? Elena looked at Damien. He looked back at her. That's not my determination to make today, she said. That depends on what the investigation finds, and on what choices he makes from here. The meeting ended at 6:40. In the elevator, Damien stood beside her, and neither of them spoke until the doors opened to the lobby. You protected the employees, he said. Yes, you didn't have to. I know. She pulled on her coat. They didn't make your choices for you. She walked out. He stood in the lobby doorway and watched the sedan pull away, and he had the look of a man standing at the edge of an excavation he himself had ordered, looking down at how deep it goes. The photograph arrived at the estate at 9:15 that night. Not electronically. That was the first thing that hit Elena when Mrs. Aldon brought it to the library. Physical delivery. A sealed envelope with no return address left in the mailbox at the estate's side gate, which was on a camera blind spot that the overnight guard rotation created between 8:50 and 9:20. The 90-second window. Expanded to 30 minutes by someone who knew the schedule. Inside this envelope was a single photograph, printed on high-quality stock. It was taken through the glass partition of the ultrasound room at her OB's office. She was lying on the examination table. The angle was from the parking structure across the narrow alley, a telephoto lens, no question through a gap in the blinds that she had assumed were closed. The image was sharp enough to read the appointment schedule visible on the wall behind her. Her OB's name, the date, the room number. Someone had known she would be there, in that room, on that day, at that time. There was nothing written on the photograph. The message was the photograph itself. Elena set it face down on the desk. She breathed for a moment, carefully, the way you breathe when you are choosing your reaction rather than having one. Then she called Farida. "I need you to come to the estate tonight," she said. "Bring whoever handles physical evidence." "How urgent?" "Urgent enough." She called the estate's head of security, not Marcus Orsini, who managed the overnight team, but his direct supervisor, a former federal contractor named Bernard Holt, who reported directly to Elena's team. She told Holt she needed a quiet audit of the overnight rotation for the past 6 weeks, starting with camera coverage records, and she needed it without Orsini knowing it had been requested. Holt was quiet for 2 seconds. Understood, she didn't call Damien. She sat in the library with the photograph face down on the desk and the unborn child moving slowly inside her, and she thought about what the photograph was supposed to do, what the sender expected her to feel, which was fear, and then what fear was supposed to produce, which was compliance. She was afraid. She was not going to let that fact determine her next move. Farida arrived at 10:30 with a forensics technician who bagged the photograph, the envelope, and the surface of the mailbox. Holt came to the library at 11 with the first pass of the audit findings, which he laid on the desk without comment and waited while Elena read. The camera blind spot at the side gate was not accidental. It had been created 6 weeks ago by a minor adjustment to the camera angle logged as a routine maintenance correction by Marcus Orsini. "How many times has that window been used?" Elena asked. "We can't confirm entries, but there are 8 separate instances over 6 weeks where the gate's electronic log shows a passive code, read like someone testing whether the signal carries during that exact window. Passive read means someone with a clone of an authorized card was checking the signal without fully activating entry." "Yes, ma'am." Elena looked at the list of authorized cardholders for that gate. There were 12 names. One of them was Marcus Orsini. She did not ask Holt to bring Orsini into tonight. She asked Holt to quietly reassign Orsini to an external post, away from the estate, away from the cameras, away from anything connected to the investigation with a cover reason that wouldn't raise a flag. And she asked him to document every detail of Orsini's access history going back 18 months. When Holt left, Farida stayed. "The photograph was meant to rattle you," Farida said. She was standing at the window, looking out at the darkened garden, her arms crossed and her voice flat the way it got, when she was thinking rather than talking. "Someone wants you frightened enough to make a move they can respond to. Probably wants you to contact the authorities publicly, make noise, go on the defensive. I know, or they want you to retreat." Farida glanced at her. "Give up the trust freeze. Back down from the investigation." "I know that too. What do you want to do?" Elena looked at the face-down photograph on the desk. "I want to understand who took it," she said, "and I want to know who gave them the appointment information." "That's a short list. Your OB's office staff, your driver. Antonio has been with my family for 22 years. He's not on the list. Then office staff. Or someone who accessed your personal calendar. Which means someone inside this house," Elena said. Frida nodded slowly. "Orsini didn't take the photograph himself," Elena continued. "He was here that day, but he could have provided access to whoever was watching the appointment. Vescari's people, most likely." Farida was quiet for a moment. "Elena." It was the first time that night she'd used her first name, which meant she was about to say something that required a different kind of attention. If Vescari is running a coordinated play, the forged seal, the Lorenzo acquisition, the photograph, this isn't about embarrassing Damien or acquiring an asset. This is a full elimination strategy. He's trying to dismantle the entire Valenti Marcelli network. Take the ports, take the infrastructure. Do it while the family is publicly fractured, and nobody's watching the mechanism. I know, Islena said. The timing of last night was not a coincidence. Elena picked up her pen and turned the notepad to a fresh page. Someone encouraged Damien to go public at the gala. Someone made sure the marriage looked catastrophically unstable at the exact moment they needed the company to look vulnerable. Farida looked at her. Celeste, Elena said. You think she's Viscari's? I think a woman who left a relationship with Damien Valenti 8 years ago and reappeared at the precise moment a sophisticated corporate attack is being run against his holdings is not operating independently. She wrote the name. I think the affair was the mechanism, not the motive. Damien's humiliation was a business strategy dressed up as a personal one. The room was very quiet. Outside, the rain had come back, not the hard autumn variety of the previous night, but something thinner and more persistent, the kind that settles in for days. I want Celeste's financials, Elena said. Business connections, travel records, any known association with Vescari's holding network. I want to know when the relationship with Damien resumed and what triggered the timing. I can have preliminary findings by morning. Good. Farida left at midnight. Elena stayed in the library. She did not go to sleep. She was not going to sleep. There was a particular quality to the silence of the house at this hour, the specific hush of a building where everyone is asleep except one person, and that person is the one holding the most information. She opened the first of her father's journals. Marco Marcelli had written everything longhand, in the dense, forward-leaning script of someone who wrote fast, because the thinking outpaced the hand. The journals were not personal. In the sentimental sense, they were operational, strategic, documentary. The record of a man who had built something and wanted to make sure the architecture survived him. She found the entry she was looking for on page 47 of the third journal. Port Aurelia is not simply a port. It is the axle. Everything that runs through the northern coastal network runs through Aurelia. Anyone who controls Aurelia controls the rhythm of 300 miles of commerce. I have protected it inside the trust, not because I distrust the Valentis, but because I understand that the people who want it will come from directions the Valentis aren't watching. They watch their competitors. They should watch their friends. She set the journal down. Port Aurelia, the photograph, the seal forgery, the Lorenzo acquisition creating the paper trail. Orsinici inside the estate feeding information. Celeste inside Damien's confidence, managing his emotional state and timing his public breakdown to coincide with the corporate vulnerability window. It wasn't a play against Damien's pride. It was a play for the port. All of it, every piece of it, was designed to create a window in which the Marcelli Continuity Trust could be accessed, transferred, or rendered unenforceable, and Port Aurelia could be absorbed into Vescari's network, while the Valenti family was too fractured and too publicly humiliated to mount a coherent defense. The gala wasn't Damien choosing Celeste over Elena. It was Damien being operated. She thought about what it meant to tell him that. The specific, strange calculus of warning someone who had just publicly betrayed you that they are being used by the person they chose to humiliate you for. She thought about Sienna, the name she had chosen and not yet spoken aloud to anyone, written only in her own handwriting in the back of her own journal, held private for reasons she hadn't fully understood until now. She thought about what her father had built and why he had put the silver key in that cabinet and written the letter he had written. And she understood that Marco Marcelli had not simply prepared her for a legal battle. He had prepared her for this specific shape of attack, because he had seen it coming. Not this particular version of it, not Celeste, not Vescara by name, but the general form. The approach from the direction no one was watching. The mechanism of the personal used to open the door to the strategic. Someone has mistaken your silence for surrender. She closed the journal. At 2:30 in the morning, her phone rang. Unknown number. Not the burner from before different carrier signature, according to the trace app Farida had installed. New number. Deliberate, she answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's. Calm, unhurried, with the specific quality of someone who has rehearsed the conversation, but is performing it as spontaneous. I think we should speak directly, Celeste Rourke said. Elena said nothing. I know you're running an investigation. I know what you've found, and I know what you haven't found yet. A pause. There's a version of this where you get out cleanly, Elena. Keep the trust, Protect your child. Let the rest of it collapse under Damien's incompetence. Walk away from the port, and no one has a reason to look in your direction anymore. Elena kept her voice level. And if I don't walk away from the port? A beat. Then the people who do want it will stop being indirect about how they acquire it. The temperature of the threat was unmistakable. It did not name Sienna. It did not need to. The photograph had already named her. Think about it, Elena said. Don't think too long, Celeste said. The window on a clean exit is shorter than you'd like. She hung up. Elena set the phone on the desk and pressed both hands flat on the surface, the same gesture father had made when he was settling himself after something that deserved more reaction than he was going to give it. She sat like that for 10 seconds. Then she picked up the phone and called Farida's emergency line. Celeste just called me directly, she said when Farida answered. Record the call transcript from the tap. She's not just Viscari's contact, she's running operational decisions. She made the call herself because she doesn't trust whoever she's working with to deliver the message at the right level of pressure. That means she's feeling the investigation, Farida said. Yes, and it means she doesn't know how much we have. Elena looked at the journal on the desk. Farida, I need everything on Port Aurelia's Marcelli archive. Not the surface documentation, the deep infrastructure. The access protocols, the physical layout, and specifically what my father built into the original vault system. That'll take a few days to pull together. You have until day after tomorrow. She hung up. She sat in the dark library with the rain on the glass, and the journals on the desk, and the photograph face down, and the weight of everything accumulating around her, the investigation, the threat, the forged seal, the gala, the 1,100 employees who didn't know any of this was happening, and somewhere above her, in a marriage bed she hadn't slept in for 3 weeks before last night, the man who had once been the person she trusted most in the world. She thought about going up there. She thought about telling him. She thought about what Marco had written. They should watch their friends. Damien was not her enemy. She had been fairly clear-eyed about that for 12 hours now. He was a man who had been managed, maneuvered, and operated into a position that served someone else's purposes, and he had been arrogant enough, and distracted enough, and lonely enough, in whatever private way powerful men become lonely, that he had not seen the shape of it. But he had not seen the shape of it. And there was a difference between the enemy and the person who opened the door for the enemy without knowing what they were opening. The difference mattered. She would not pretend otherwise. But she was also not going to go up there tonight. Some information needed to be protected until the moment it could be used correctly, and that meant held close, held quiet, and released only when the timing served the outcome rather than the emotion. She had learned that from Marco. She was her father's daughter. She opened the 4th journal and kept reading, and the rain came down outside the library window. And somewhere in the house a clock reached 3 in the morning and didn't announce itself to anyone. The next morning, Farida's people confirmed what Elena had already begun to suspect. Celeste Rourke's penthouse was empty. Not abandoned, cleared. The kind of clearing that takes planning, that involves prearranged logistics, that doesn't happen in a night unless the night was anticipated. Her phone was offline. Her private email server had been accessed the previous afternoon and partially wiped, but not before Farida's contact at the forensics firm pulled a shadow copy of the activity log. The log showed 2 things. First, someone had accessed Damien's business account from Celeste's server 9 days ago. Not a full access, a targeted pull of specific files. Port security schedules, corporate acquisition documents, and one other file that the log referenced by its internal code rather than its title, but which Farida's team identified by cross-referencing the code against Damien's document management system. Elena's prenatal medical records. The second thing the log showed was an outgoing message, sent the same day, to an encrypted address Farida was still working to trace. The message body was deleted, but the metadata on the send showed a file attachment of 4.2 megabytes. The photograph of Elena in the ultrasound room was approximately 4.1 megabytes. Celeste Rourke had not stumbled into this. She had assembled it, packaged it, and delivered it. And now she was gone. Elena was in the kitchen when Damien came down at 7. He looked like a man who had slept briefly and badly, which was accurate. He looked at her across the counter with the same expression he'd had in the library, that recalibrated, arithmetic quality, the look of someone revising their understanding of a situation in real time. She set a coffee in front of the empty stool. He sat. Celeste is gone, he said. I know. He looked up. How long have you known? Since early this morning. She poured her own coffee. Her server was accessed 9 days ago. Your business account was pulled. Port security schedules, acquisition documents, and my medical records. The sound Damien made was not quite a word. She accessed your account from her server, Elena said. Probably while you were with her. Probably without your knowledge. And she sent the files to Vescari's network. He put both hands around the coffee mug and didn't drink from it. She was in your life before you met me, Elena said. When did she come back? 8 months ago, he said. She reached out, said she'd changed, that she regretted how things ended. He stopped. I knew it was wrong. I knew it from the first conversation. But I told myself it was just, he stopped again. You told yourself a lot of things, Elena said. Yes. That's not an excuse. No, he looked at her. I'm not offering it as one. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the city was doing its morning indifferent and continuous. She took my medical records, Elena said. The words were flat. She sent prenatal records to people who delivered a photograph to my mailbox to tell me they know where I go, what room I'm in, what my schedule looks like. Something moved across Damien's face. That photograph was in the envelope. His voice was different, lower, stripped of the managed quality he usually carried. Celeste sent them information about your appointments. Yes. He set down the coffee. Elena, don't, she said. I said don't. She set down her own cup. Whatever you need to say to manage your guilt right now, I am not the person to say it to. What I need from you is operational. Can you give me that? He held her gaze. Something in him went quiet, the particular quiet of a man choosing to receive rather than react, which was not a quality she had ever associated with Damien Valenti before last night. Yes, he said. I need your access codes for the private account Celeste pulled from. I need to know every conversation you had with her. About business, anything you mentioned, about Valenti Capital, about the port, about pending acquisitions. You'll have it by noon. And I need you to understand that the gala was not simply you choosing to humiliate me. The timing was engineered. You were managed into that public announcement at the exact moment a corporate attack was being prepared. Your breakdown was a business strategy. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Damien looked at the table, then at her. She set me up, he said. You cooperated, Elena said. Nobody forced you to go back to her. Nobody forced you to say what you said last night. But yes, the timing was not yours. He looked like a man standing in the wreckage of something he'd built and beginning to understand, for the first time, that the damage is not entirely from the storm. What do you need me to do, he said. Elena picked up her coffee. For now, she said, tell me everything about Port Aurelia and every conversation you ever had about it, with anyone connected to Roman Vescari. He started talking. She listened, and the rain came back, thin and persistent, against the kitchen window, and somewhere above them the nursery waited with its folded small things, and somewhere in the city Celeste Rourke was gone. Somewhere, in a network of shell companies and encrypted servers, a plan that had been running for longer than Elena's marriage was approaching, the moment where it would need her to do something. She had no intention of doing what it needed. But she was beginning to understand what she was going to do instead, and it was going to require the silver key, and the archive beneath Port Aurelia, and every piece of evidence Farida could pull before the window closed. She was going to need Damien's cooperation. She was not yet certain he had earned it. But the clock on all of this was running, and the person who had sent that photograph was counting on her to be too frightened, too angry, or too pregnant to move first. Every one of those calculations was wrong. Damien talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Elena did not interrupt him. She refilled her coffee once, moved to the library when he asked if they could sit somewhere less exposed to request. She understood to mean somewhere that didn't feel like a kitchen, somewhere with walls, that felt more like a room designed for serious things, and she sat across from him with a legal pad and wrote down what he said without editorializing, without reacting. In the same methodical way, her father had taught her to receive information, collect it first, assess it second, never let the assessment contaminate the collection. What Damien knew about Roman Vescari was both more and less than she'd expected. More because he had been aware for several years that Vescari operated at the margins of the legitimate port industry, moving things through connections that didn't appear on public documentation, using layered ownership structures to control birthrights he technically didn't hold. Less because what he knew was circumstantial, old, gathered through the natural competitive intelligence of two men operating in overlapping industries, and he had never followed it to its source because he had not, until this morning, understood that Vescari was running a strategy against him rather than simply competing with him. "The Lorenzo bid," Elena said when he reached that part. "I thought I won it on merit." He said it without defensiveness, which was worse in a way the flat statement of a man confronting his own willingness to believe what he wanted to believe. "The bid came in clean. The financials were audited. I didn't look at the guarantor structure the way I should have. Because you wanted the acquisition. Because I wanted it." He put his pen down. "And because someone made sure it looked exactly like what I wanted it to look like." Elena wrote something on the pad. "Did Celeste ever ask you directly about Port Aurelia?" "Not directly." He was quiet for a moment. "She asked about the company. About what worried me. I talked more than I should have. About the trust complications after your father died. About the fact that the port was the most legally complex piece of what we held." He looked at the table. I didn't tell her specifics, but she knew the shape of it. She didn't need specifics. She needed the shape. He nodded. "And Vescari's people built the rest from public filings, and whatever Orsini fed them from inside this house." At the name Orsini, Damien looked up. "You're certain," he said. "The camera adjustment, the card access pattern, the photograph timing." She closed the pad. "I'm certain enough to act on it. I'm not certain enough to destroy him publicly yet, which is why I've moved him off the estate rotation without explanation." Damien absorbed that. "He's been with me 11 years. I know, I trusted him in rooms with you." He stopped. "With me when I was alone," Elena said. "Yes, I know that too." Something moved through Damien's face, something raw and unmanaged, which on him looked strange because he had spent 20 years making sure nothing on his face was unmanaged. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and breathed through his nose for a moment, and Elena watched him do it and did not offer him anything, because there was nothing she could offer that would be genuine rather than habitual. "The investigation is going to move fast now," she said when he had settled. "Celeste's disappearance is going to accelerate whatever Vescari is planning. If he was waiting for the trust freeze to be reversed, which I believe was the intent, he now knows that's not going to happen voluntarily. He'll move to a different mechanism, which is force, coercion, or compromise." She stood up and went to the cabinet and looked at it without opening it. "He wants Port Aurelia. He's going to run out of time for subtlety." Farida's full briefing on the Port Aurelia Marcelli archive arrived the following afternoon, delivered in a sealed case that Farida brought personally rather than sending by courier. She sat across from Elena at the library desk, while Elena read it, page by page, with the specific patience of someone who has learned not to skip ahead. The archive was something Marco Marcelli had built into the original Port Aurelia customs infrastructure 30 years ago. When his company had funded the renovation of the old freight processing facility and had negotiated certain rights into the building's deed that had never been made public. Behind the facility's sub-basement level, access through a maintenance corridor that did not appear on any publicly filed floor plan, was a vault that Marco had described in his journals as the Axle's Axle, the place where the original proof of ownership lived, where the trust charter's physical record was kept, and where the actual mechanism of the Marcelli Continuity Trust's Port Authority was documented in a form that could not be digitally altered or remotely compromised. The silver key did not simply open the archive. Elena read this section twice. The key was part of a verification system Marco had engineered with a security firm he'd used exclusively and then dissolved. The design was entirely custom, entirely physical, and entirely undocumented in any filing that a third party could access. When the key was inserted into the archive terminal and a palm verification was completed, it didn't just authenticate the user. It triggered a secondary protocol that Marco had built in for exactly the scenario she was now inhabiting, a coercion protocol. If the palm verification was completed under duress, if the user had activated the protocol by entering the archive's outer corridor through the maintenance passage, rather than the main entry, the key did not unlock the archive for transfer. Instead, it activated a recording and transmission function that captured every digital signature, every device in the vicinity, every attempted transaction, and transmitted it to an independent server Marco had seeded with the same security firm before dissolving it. A dead man's trap. An architect who had looked at the shape of the threat and built the counter into the foundation before anyone arrived to threaten. Elena set down the briefing. She sat very still. Outside the library window, a car passed on the street below, and its headlights swept across the ceiling for a moment, and she watched the light move and thought about her father sitting in this chair, or in a chair like it, understanding that the people who came for what he'd built would come from the direction no one was watching, and building accordingly. He knew, she said. Farida looked at her. He built the specific counter, Elena said. Not a general security protocol, a coercion-specific one. He knew that whatever threat came for the port would come in the form of pressure on whoever held the key, which would be you, which is me. She looked at the key on its black ribbon, sitting on the corner of the desk where she'd placed it that morning. He knew they'd come for me, so the question is whether you're willing to use it. The question, Elena said, is whether I can make them come to me in the right way. That was the night Damien knocked on the library door again. It was late past 10, the house settled into its nighttime quiet. Elena had been reviewing the archive briefing for the third time, annotating the sections about the coercion protocol, building the shape of something in her mind that was not yet a plan, but was becoming one. She said, "Come in." He stood in the doorway in the same dark clothes from the morning, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who has spent the day in his own company, reaching a conclusion that cost him something to arrive at. "I need to say something," he said. "Then say it." He came in, didn't sit. Stood in front of the desk with his hands at his sides, which on him looked deliberate, the specific physical choice of a man making himself available to be judged without using his body to defend against it. "I told myself the marriage was wrong from the beginning," he said. "That I'd been cornered into it by circumstance, by your father's backing, by momentum. I told myself that for years. It was easier than telling myself the truth, which is that I chose it. I chose it freely, and I chose everything after it." He stopped. "Including last week," Elena waited. "I am not going to ask you to forgive me," he said. "I don't think that's something you owe me, and I don't think it's something I've earned the right to ask for." He paused. "But I need you to know that the things I said at the gala, I knew they'd hurt you. I knew it in the specific way. You know something will hurt before you do it, and you do it anyway." Another pause, shorter. "That's not a mistake. That's a choice, and I own it." The room was quiet. "Why are you telling me this now?" Elena said. "Because I need you to know that I understand what I did, and I need to be able to work with you on what comes next, without you wondering whether I understand it." He met her eyes. "And because you deserve someone to say it plainly, instead of managing how it lands." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She told him about the archive, about the coercion protocol, about what her father had built and why. She told him the shape of the plan that was forming in her mind, not the details, because the details were still developing, but the architecture. The idea that the only way to expose Vescari's full network was to give him access to the key under conditions that appeared to be coercion, but were in fact controlled. "You'd be walking in there as the target," Damien said. "Yes. 7 months pregnant. 7.5 now." "Elena, say what you were going to say." "I was going to say you can't." He stopped himself. Visibly, the specific physical check of a man catching his own instinct mid-sentence and reconsidering it. He started again. "Tell me the plan." She studied him. It was, she would think later, the moment she first considered that there might be more to Damien Valenti than what he'd shown for 10 years. Not because he'd done something heroic, because he'd stopped himself from doing something reflexive, and the stopping was visible, and he hadn't tried to make it look easier than it was. She told him the plan. He listened. He asked 2 questions, operational ones, practical, the right questions. He did not argue. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "What do you need from me?" "Your private access codes," she said. "Domestic and foreign accounts. Everything. My investigators get full access." He didn't hesitate. "Done. And if the investigation produces evidence of your own illegal authorizations, and it will, you accept that?" Pause, shorter than she expected. "Yes," he said. "No shielding. No lawyers running interference. Whatever comes out, comes out." Yes, she studied him. Why, she said. He looked at her directly. To protect our daughter. She held his gaze. And if I never forgive you, she said. Then the truth still needs to come out, he said. Those are separate things. She looked down at the briefing on the desk, at the key on its black ribbon, at her father's handwriting in the margin of the journal, dense and forward-leaning, the hand of a man who always wrote, like the thinking was faster than the time. Go get some sleep, she said. We have work starting at 6. He stood, nodded, went to the door. Damien. He stopped. Celeste told you she'd changed, Elena said, and you wanted to believe it. That's not a character flaw. That's just being human. She paused. The flaw was what you did with the wanting. But the wanting itself, I understand it. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he left. She sat alone in the library for a long time after that, and she did not let herself think about what she had just said or why she had said it, because some things required more distance than she currently had, and the plan required her full attention for what remained. The confirmation about Marcus Orsini came at 6:40 the following morning. Bernard Holt laid the full audit on Elena's desk in the kitchen, while Damien was on his phone, with his attorney delivering the access codes, and Farida's team was already running the secondary financial trace. Holt's report was thorough in the way ex-federal contractors are thorough, comprehensive, annotated, devoid of language that could be characterized as opinion. Orsini had been on Vescari's supplemental payroll for 22 months. The payments were structured through a consulting entity registered in his wife's maiden name, which had been what kept it off the initial scan. The name didn't match any of the known Vescari shell companies. Holt's team had found the connection through a shared accountant, a mid-tier financial services firm that appeared in both Orsini's consulting company filings and in the ownership chain of a property connected to one of Vescari's subordinates. 22 months. He had been in this house for 22 months as a paid operative. He had been in the nursery. He had been on the floor where she slept. He had been present at conversations she believed were private, in rooms she believed were secure. Elena read the report without expression. She was aware of the particular quality of the anger she felt, not hot, not trembling, but very cold and very clear, the kind that doesn't dissipate because it has nowhere to go and is in no hurry to get there. Move to formal extraction, she told Holt. I want him out of the city before noon. Coordinate with the federal contact Farida gave you. This goes to them directly, not through any channel connected to Valenti's legal team. Understood. And I want the full 22 months of access logs reconstructed. Everything he was in proximity to, every conversation he could have overheard, every room he entered alone. That'll take 2 days minimum. You have one. Holt left. Elena sat at the kitchen table. The morning light was doing something complicated through the window, the particular quality of October light in this city that was neither warm nor cold, but something indeterminate, the color of decisions made on insufficient information. She thought about the nursery, about the crib she'd assembled herself, because she'd wanted to do it herself in an afternoon when the house was empty and she'd put on music and worked without asking for help. Orsini had been in that room. He'd walked past that crib with whatever he was carrying in his head, whatever he'd been paid to notice and report back. She stood up. She went to the nursery. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room, the pale walls, the folded things in the dresser, the crib with its carefully chosen mattress, and she breathed, carefully, the way you breathe when you are deciding what something means to you, rather than allowing it to be decided for you. It was still hers. He had walked through it. He had not taken anything from it that she had not already decided to protect. She turned back down the hallway. At 9 in the morning, Farida called. Celeste's encrypted server trace came back, Farida said. Her voice was the careful voice she used when the news was bad in a specific direction. The outgoing message from 9 days ago, the one with the attachment. We traced the destination address, and it routed through 3 relay servers, but the terminal destination is a device registered to a shell company we have in the Vescari network. A pause. But Elena, the originating metadata shows the message was drafted 2 weeks before it was sent. Elena went still. 2 weeks before, she said, yes. It was sitting in a draft folder, ready to send, waiting for a trigger. What was the trigger? The send timestamp is 11:47 p.m. on the night of the gala. The night of the gala. 47 minutes after Damien's announcement. 47 minutes after the glass hit the marble floor and the room went silent. Celeste sent the photograph to Vescari's team the night of the gala, Elena said. Before she left the building, yes. She was in the ballroom when she sent it. Yes, which means the photograph was taken earlier. Possibly weeks earlier, held in reserve, sent the moment Damien made the announcement public. That's what the metadata suggests. Elena closed her eyes for 1 second. Opened them. The announcement was the trigger. She waited until the marriage was publicly destroyed and then activated the threat protocol. She needed the marriage visibly fractured before Vescari moved on the port, and Damien's announcement was the confirmation that it was done. She managed the timing of the whole thing, Farita said. Down to the minute. Elena exhaled slowly. She was never in love with him. This was never about Damien and Celeste. It was a 2-year operational asset placement that used a personal relationship as cover. Farida was quiet for a moment. I know this isn't the time. It's not, Elena said. But yes, I understand what it means about what he went through. We'll get there. Not now. She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she felt the slow, unmistakable pressure in her lower back that had been building since yesterday, and that she had been, with professional discipline, choosing to catalog as stress-related. It moved, and she breathed through it, and it passed, and she set the phone down and breathed again. Not yet, not quite yet. She needed 3 more days. She needed Vescari to move. She needed to be standing in the right place when he did. The call came at 2:15 in the afternoon. Not from a burner. Not from Celeste's number, which had been dead since the night of the gala. From a line registered to a legitimate business, a shipping consultation firm that Elena's team had on the Vescari-adjacent list, but hadn't yet fully mapped. The voice was male. Not Vescari himself, someone working for him, the operational layer. A man whose voice had the particular flat quality of someone delivering a script they didn't write. Ms. Marcelli, he said. Mr. Vescari would like to settle the Port Aurelia debt dispute directly. He's prepared to offer a full account of the Lorenzo acquisition irregularities, all documentation, in exchange for a simple authorization transfer from the Marcelli archive. A settlement meeting, Elena said. A private resolution. Tonight, if possible. Mr. Vescari would prefer to resolve this before the investigation goes wider. She kept her voice even. Where? The Port Aurelia Customs Facility. The original building. Mr. Vescari would prefer a location that has significance to the archive, she said. Yes. I understand his preference. She paused. I'll need to review the proposal terms first. Send them. Mr. Vescari prefers to exchange terms in person. Then Mr. Vescari can wait until I've spoken with my attorney. She paused. Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock, the customs facility. A brief silence. Agreed. She hung up. Her hands were not shaking. She checked them, a deliberate inventory, the kind her father had taught her to do when the body's response might not match the mind's decision. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was slightly elevated. The low pressure in her back had returned and was sitting there with patient, uncomplicated specificity. She called Farida first. It's moving, she said. Tomorrow night. Port Aurelia Customs Facility. That's fast. He's feeling the investigation. He needs the archive transfer before we close the net. She paused. Pull everything on the facility layout. The maintenance corridor, the sub-basement entry, the archive terminal location. I need it all verified against what my father's journals describe. Elena, and call the independent investigators. The federal contact Bernard gave you. Not to move yet, just to be positioned. I'll tell you when. Elena. Farida's voice was different this time, not the careful professional voice, but something closer to personal. You're 7.5 months pregnant. I'm aware. If something goes wrong in there, then I'll have activated the coercion protocol. The transmission will have gone out, and the investigators will have everything they need to close Vescari's entire network. She paused. The plan works whether or not I walk out clean. That's the point. Farida was quiet for a long moment. You didn't design this plan as a trap for Vescari, Farida said slowly. You designed it so that even if they take the key by force, the key destroys them. My father designed it, Elena said. I'm using it. She hung up. She sat in the library. The afternoon light was going, now that early autumn collapse into dark that happens faster than you expect, and the room was settling into evening shadow, and she sat in her father's chair with the silver key on its black ribbon in her hands, and she thought about what she was going to walk into tomorrow night. She thought about Sienna. She thought about the name she had kept private, held close, not spoken yet to anyone. The name she had written in her own journal, in her own hand, because it was the one thing in all of this that was entirely hers, entirely new, not connected to anything that had come before. Sienna Marcelcelli, not Valenti. She had been clear about that in her own mind since the night of the gala, before the trust activation, before any of the rest of it, that clarity had arrived first, solid and simple, before the strategy. She would walk into that facility tomorrow evening, carrying her daughter. She would carry the key. She would walk through the maintenance corridor that activated the coercion protocol. And if Vescari's people forced her to use the key under duress, which was the plan, which was what her father had built the counter for every transaction they attempted, every document they touched, every device in the vicinity would transmit to an independent server that no one except Elena and the security firm's surviving technical lead could access. The trap would close. The network would be exposed. And Sienna would be born into a world where the people who had threatened her before she had a name were inside a federal case that would take years to fully dismantle. That was the plan. It was a good plan. It required her to walk into a room with armed men and a woman who had already demonstrated her willingness to use Elena's unborn child as leverage, and to do it voluntarily, and to do it without panic, and to trust that the architecture her father had built 30 years ago would hold under conditions he had imagined but never tested. She held the key. The silver was warm from her hands. She heard footsteps in the hall, Damien's footsteps, the particular rhythm she had known for 10 years stop outside the library door. A knock. "Come in," she said. He opened the door, looked at her, looked at the key in her hands. "Vescari called," she said. "Tomorrow night. Port Aurelia." He crossed the room and sat across from her, and his face had the look of a man who has run out of ways to not know what he knows. "You're going to go," he said. "Yes." "You're going to use the archive as a trap." "Yes." He was quiet. "I want to be there," he said. "No." "Elena, if you're there, he'll offer you the deal he always intended to offer you," she said. "The one where you betray me and protect the Empire. He'll make it real. He'll make it possible. And I need to know that option isn't in the room." Damien held her gaze. Something moved through his face, not anger, not protest. Something that had the specific weight of a man being given information about himself that he would rather not honestly receive, but that he cannot honestly dispute. "You don't trust that I'd refuse," he said. She looked at him. "I trust that you'd want to," she said. "I don't know yet if that's the same thing." The silence was long and specific. "Then what do I do?" he said. She set the key on the desk between them. "Give the investigators everything," she said. "Domestic and foreign, every ledger, every account. Everything that was yours, and everything that was done in your name without your knowledge. All of it in the morning, before I walk into that facility." He looked at the key. "Everything," he said, "everything." He was quiet for a moment that had the quality of a door being walked through, one that closes behind you and doesn't reopen. "All right," he said. "If what I'm doing tomorrow works," Elena said, "the case against Vescari will be federal and airtight. But the same investigation will produce everything about Valenti Capital's unauthorized transactions. You understand that?" "Yes. You won't be able to protect yourself from what comes from that." "I know." She looked at him. "Why?" she said. "You asked me that last night," he said. "I'm asking again." He looked at the key between them, and then he looked at her, and what was on his face was not performed and not managed, and not the expression of a man who has calculated the cost of honesty against the cost of dishonesty and found honesty cheaper. It was just a man. "Because she's coming into this world," he said. "And I want there to be something true in it that I put there." Elena looked at him for a long time. She picked up the key. She stood. "Be here at 6, she said. "Bring your attorney and your financial records. Farida's team will be ready." She went to the door. "And Damien, whatever you feel about what I'm doing tomorrow night, keep it. I can't carry it for you right now." She left him in the library. She walked upstairs. She stood in the doorway of the nursery in the dark, and she breathed, and she held the key in her hand, and she let the particular silence of the house settle around her. Tomorrow night she would walk into a room where armed men were waiting, carrying something they could not take without destroying themselves. And she would stand in front of the woman who had spent 2 years dismantling her marriage as a business strategy, and she would not flinch. Her father had built the counter into the foundation. She was going to make Vescari walk directly into it. But tonight, standing in the doorway of the room she had prepared with her own hands, with the key warm against her palm, and her daughter moving in the slow, deliberate way she moved at this hour, Elena Marcelli understood something that no plan could account for and no trap could guarantee. She was afraid, not of the facility, not of Vescari, not even of Celeste, who was somewhere in the city waiting for the moment the whole mechanism executed. She was afraid of the thing that fear does to a person when they refuse to let it change the decision, the specific, exhausting cost of carrying something that heavy through something that dangerous and coming out the other side still recognizable as yourself. She pressed her hand against the crib rail. The wood was solid and smooth under her fingers. She had built this. She went to bed, she set the alarm for 5. And in the morning, she would begin the last day before the longest night. And everything her father had built, and everything she had spent 10 years learning, and everything Vescari had spent 2 years dismantling, would converge at the edge of a harbor in the rain. The alarm went off at 5, and Elena was already awake. She had been awake since 3:40, lying in the dark with her hand flat on her stomach and her eyes on the ceiling, running the plan through its sequences, the way her father had taught her to run anything important, not rehearsing the outcome, but stress, testing the junctions, the places where the architecture could fail, the moments where human unpredictability entered, and the blueprint stopped being reliable. She had found 3 such junctions. She had no solutions for 2 of them. She got up anyway. The morning was cold in the specific way. October mornings were cold in this city, not winter yet, but the warmth had left the air without announcement, and the light coming through the bathroom window was pale and flat and without comfort. She stood under the shower until the water ran less hot than she wanted, and then she got out and dressed and went downstairs. Damien was already in the kitchen. He had the financial records spread across the table, physical files, 3 laptops, a portable drive, a legal pad covered in his handwriting. He had his attorney on speakerphone. He was going through authorizations line by line, flagging the ones his attorney was marking for disclosure, and he did not stop when Elena came in. But he looked up and she saw in his face that he had also not slept. She made coffee. She did not tell him. He looked tired. He did not tell her. She looked afraid. They were past the point where either of them had the energy for the social chicanery of those observations. Farida arrived at 6:15 with her team. Bernard Holt arrived at 6:30. By 7, the kitchen table was an operation surface, and Elena was standing at the window, with her coffee looking out at the garden where the grass was heavy with overnight dew, and the autumn light was doing nothing to make anything look better. The investigators are positioned, Farida said from behind her. Federal. 2-vehicle perimeter around the customs facility. They will not move until they receive the transmission from the archive terminal. And if the transmission doesn't come, then they move on my signal at 8:15. No, Elena turned. They move only on the transmission. If they move before the protocol activates, Vescari's lawyers will have everything thrown out within 48 hours. It has to be clean. Farida held her gaze, and if the protocol doesn't activate, it will activate. Elena, it will activate because I will make it activate, she said. My father built it for exactly this moment. The key, the maintenance corridor entry, palm verification under documented duress. It will work. Farida did not argue further. She knew what Elena knew, that the architecture was sound. What neither of them said aloud was the thing that lived in the space between a sound plan and its execution. The human variable, the weight of 7.5 months, the specific vulnerability of a body carrying another body into a room where armed men were waiting. They didn't say it. They didn't need to. By 9, Damien's attorney had the disclosure package ready for the federal contact. 214 pages, domestic and foreign accounts. Every unauthorized transaction, every concealed movement, everything that bore his name and shouldn't. He signed on the cover page and did not look at it after. He handed it to Holt. Make sure it gets there before she goes in tonight, he said. Yes, sir. Holt left. Elena watched Damien from across the kitchen. He was standing with his hands on the back of a chair, looking at the cleared table, at the ghost of what had been there an hour ago. He had the particular posture of a man who has just done something that cannot be undone and is now existing in the first moments of the aftermath. It's done, she said. Yes, whatever comes from it. I know what comes from it. He looked at her. I made peace with that last night. She studied him. She had known this man for 10 years. She had slept beside him and built beside him and grieved beside him when her father died, and she had also been lied to by him in the specific, grinding way that happens not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 small choices to prefer comfort over honesty. She knew his face with the particular intimacy of long proximity, and what she saw in it right now was something she had not seen in 10 years of looking. He was not performing. "I'll be back by 10 tonight," she said. "Don't," she said, not harshly, just clearly. "Whatever you're about to say, don't. I need to carry this clean." He closed his mouth. She left the kitchen. She spent the afternoon in the library. She reread the archive briefing 3 more times. She ate something Mrs. Aldane brought a plate and stood there until Elena had consumed enough of it to satisfy some minimum standard. She sat with the silver key and turned it in her hands and thought about her father's hands, which had been large and deliberate and always slightly rough, the hands of a man who had never stopped doing physical work, even when he no longer needed to. At 4 o'clock, the low pressure in her back returned. She breathed through it, catalogued it, confirmed it passed. It did. At 5:30, she changed into clothes that were practical dark, nothing that would catch light or restrict movement, flat shoes she could actually walk in, a coat with deep pockets. She put the silver key in the left interior pocket where it sat against her ribs. She put her phone in the right pocket and checked that Farida's number was the first contact. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like what she was, a woman who was 7.5 months pregnant, going somewhere she had chosen to go, carrying something the people in that place would try to take from her. She looked like her father. She thought, like someone who had decided. Antonio had the car ready. She had told him he was dropping her at the port's public entrance, and then leaving he had objected once, quietly, and she had thanked him for it and told him to leave, and he had understood that she meant it. The drive took 22 minutes. The city at 6:30 in the evening had the particular energy of a place transitioning from one version of itself to another. The workday bleeding into the night, the light going orange and flat over the harbor, the water doing what water does in autumn, which is look colder than it is. The Port Aurelia Customs Facility was a building that had been old when her father renovated it. 3 stories of pale stone that had gone dark with decades of salt air, a loading bay on the south face, a public entrance on the north that had been out of commission for 12 years. The facility wasn't actively in use. The working port had migrated to the newer structures half a mile east. What remained was the original building and the infrastructure beneath it, which was what mattered. Antonio pulled up. She got out. He started to say something. "Go home," she said. "Tell Mrs. Aldane I'll call before 10. He drove. She stood on the wet stone of the access road and looked at the building. The harbor was behind it, and she could hear the water moving against the breakwater, that particular rhythmic sound that was neither comforting nor threatening, but simply continuous, different, ongoing regardless of whatever was happening on the shore. She walked toward the entrance. Celeste was waiting inside. Not Vescari, not yet. Celeste, standing in the cold dark of the customs facility's ground floor, with 2 men on either side of her, wearing the bone-colored coat she'd had at the gala, as if the whole intervening week had been an intermission rather than a catastrophe. She looked at Elena, coming through the door with the specific expression of a woman who has been expecting something and is calibrating whether she's getting it. "You came alone," Celeste said. "I came alone," Elena said. "That's either very confident or very stupid." "I'm here to discuss a settlement," Elena said. "That's what your call proposed. I'm prepared to discuss it." Celeste looked at her coat, at her hands, at the shape of her under the dark fabric. Something moved across her face. Not warmth. Recognition of a specific kind, the recognition of someone who understands that the person they are looking at is more prepared than they look, and is deciding whether that changes anything. "Where's the key?" Celeste said. "Where's Vescari?" A pause. "He's below," Celeste said. "He wanted to review the archive layout before the meeting," which meant he was already in the sub-basement, which meant he'd already found the maintenance corridor, which meant he knew or suspected what was down there. Elena controlled her breathing. "Take me to him," she said. They went through a door at the back of the ground floor, down a service stairwell that smelled of old stone and brine, through a corridor lined with defunct electrical panels, and then through a second door that opened to the freight tunnel running beneath the facility. The tunnel was lit by temporary work lights that someone had strung recently. The cable was new, the clips were new, This had been set up in the past 24 hours. Vescari knew the layout. Of course he did. He had been planning this for 2 years. The tunnel opened into the sub-basement of the original building, and there was Roman Vescari. Elena had not met him before. She had built an image of him from documents and investigator reports, and the particular shape of the damage he had done. And the image she had built was of a man who was precise and controlled and patient in the specific way that people are patient when they are certain they are going to win. The reality was close. He was 60, silver-haired, dressed in a coat that was better than anything in the room deserved. He was standing beside a freight terminal that had been old when the building was renovated and had not been used since. There were 2 more men behind him that she hadn't seen from the tunnel. 4 total. 2 with Celeste, 2 with Vescari. Marcelli, Vescari said, "Thank you for being reasonable." "I'm not here because I'm reasonable," she said. "I'm here because you gave me a deadline, and I decided to meet it." Something in his expression acknowledged that. "The archive," he said. "The archive is through the maintenance corridor." She kept her voice even. "The corridor that requires key entry and biometric verification." "We know." He looked at the key, which she had taken from her pocket when she entered, holding it visibly. It was a deliberate choice. Give them what they're looking for. Let them focus on it. Let the focus be the thing that keeps their attention where she needs it. "The settlement terms," she said, "are simple." He moved to the freight terminal and placed a file on its surface. "You authorize the Port Aurelia trust transfer. The full archive documentation moves to my holding company. In exchange, I provide you with a complete accounting of the Lorenzo acquisition irregularities, which you can use to extricate Valenti capital from whatever federal exposure is coming." He paused. "You keep the estate, the domestic assets, and your daughter grows up in a house that isn't under federal investigation. And Damien? What happens to Damien Valenti is determined by what he has already done," Vescari said. "Not by you, not by me." Elena looked at the file on the terminal. She looked at Celeste, who was standing to her left with a stillness that was not casual. The 2 men flanking her had shifted slightly, not aggressive, not yet, but positioned. "I want to see the archive first," Elena said, "before I authorize anything." Vescari studied her. "To verify what you're asking me to transfer," she said. "You do the same a beat." "Fine," he said, together. They moved through the maintenance corridor. It was narrow cut from the original stone, clearly not part of any official floor plan, the kind of passage that had been built by someone who wanted to move through a building without appearing on documentation. The work lights ended at the corridor entrance, and she was navigating by the light from Vescari's phone, which one of his men was using as a torch. She was ahead of Vescari by 2 steps. The corridor angled down. She could feel the key in her hand. She could feel her own heartbeat, not elevated, just present. That specific heightened awareness of your own pulse that happens when the body understands that something matters. The corridor reached a second door, a heavy door, iron, original, with a terminal beside it that was not original, added by her father's security contractors, installed in the stone with precision, looking slightly wrong against the ancient material, the way all new things look slightly wrong in old places. This was the junction. The door was the coercion protocol boundary. Inside this corridor, entered through the maintenance passage rather than the main access, with the key and palm verification, the protocol would activate. The terminal would record. The transmission would begin. Everything Vescari had brought into this space, every phone, every device, every digital signature would go to the independent server. She needed him inside. She needed him to demand the transfer. She inserted the key, the terminal lit. She placed her palm on the verification surface. The terminal held for 3 seconds longer than she'd expected, long enough for her pulse to register in the base of her throat, and then it turned white. Not the green of normal access, white, the coercion protocol. Steel shutters she hadn't known were in the ceiling came down across the corridor exit behind them with a sound that was not dramatic but was final, a mechanical clunk, the sound of something engineered to do exactly one thing doing it. Vescari went rigid. "The archive is authenticating," Elena said, keeping her voice level. "It takes a moment." He looked at the closed shutter behind them, at the white terminal, at Elena. And something shifted in his face, the precision cracking at its edge. The controlled expression developing the particular fissure of a man who is beginning to understand that he has walked into a room he did not design. "What did you do?" he said. "Not a question." My father built this facility, Elena said. Did you think he didn't build it completely? Vescari moved toward her. One of his men caught her arm. She did not pull away. She stood and let him hold her arm, and she looked at Vescari directly because she needed him looking at her. Needed his attention on her face and not on the terminal that was currently transmitting everything in this corridor to a server 300 miles away. The transfer documents, Vescari said. His voice had gone flat, stripped of the controlled warmth that had carried upstairs. Authenticate them now. Those are fraudulent documents, Elena said. Authenticating them won't transfer anything. The protocol you've triggered by being in this corridor has already. He grabbed her arm himself, not through his man directly, his hand on her arm, close. Authenticate it, he said. Very quiet. The quiet that is more dangerous than noise. Celeste stepped forward. She had something in her hand. Elena looked at it, a weapon, small, held with the practiced familiarity of someone who had carried one before. She held it low near Elena's midsection, near Sienna. You were very good at staying quiet, Celeste said. Something in her voice was different here. Not the rehearsed quality of the phone call, not the performed warmth she'd used on Damien. This was stripped down, functional, the voice of someone at the operational core of something. Elena looked at her. You confused quiet with empty, she said. Celeste's jaw tightened. Authenticate the transfer, Vescari said again. The transmission is already running, Elena said. Whatever you do to me, it's running. Every device in this corridor, every signature, every message you sent to get here, it's going to an independent server that my father seeded before you existed in this industry. You can force me to put my hand on that terminal again, and it will not give you the transfer. It will give the investigators your complete network. The corridor was very quiet. Vescari was looking at the terminal, at the white light that was not changing, at the steel shutter behind him, at the woman in front of him who was 7.5 months pregnant and was not shaking. You came here to be used as the trigger, he said, slowly. My father built it so that the person holding the key would be protected even under duress, she said. The coercion protocol doesn't give the coercer what they want. It gives them to the investigators. Something broke in Vescari's face. Not collapse, he was not a man who collapsed, but the precision shattered. What was underneath was uglier and less controlled. He turned to his men. The chaos that followed was not cinematic. It was loud and close and happened in a space that was too narrow for it. Men moving in a stone corridor barely wide enough for 2 people, the work light from the phone skittering across the walls as someone dropped it, the sound of heavy boots on stone, someone shouting something that wasn't words, just volume. Elena pressed herself against the terminal wall and covered her stomach with both arms. The man who had grabbed her arm was gone, moving toward the shutter, trying to find a release that didn't exist. Vescari was at the terminal, pressing things, trying to override something he didn't understand. Celeste was the one Elena watched, because Celeste was the operational brain and Celeste had not panicked. She was moving toward Elena with the weapon still in her hand and the specific deliberateness of someone executing rather than reacting. Give me the key, Celeste said. The key is already used, Elena said. The protocol is running. Taking it from me does nothing. Give me the key. It's done, Celeste. Something shifted and Celeste faced the mask, finally coming fully off, and what was underneath was not rage exactly. It was the specific terrible expression of someone who has spent 2 years building something and is watching it disassemble in real time, and cannot stop the speed of it. She raised the weapon, and then the shutter behind them came up. Not from Vescari's men finding the release, from outside. Damien was standing in the corridor entrance. He was breathing hard. He had run. Elena realized he had come through the main facility entrance and through the tunnel and run the length of the maintenance corridor, and he was holding a weapon of his own, which she had not known he was carrying, which she had specifically told him not to be here for, and which did not matter at all right now because he was here. Release her, he said. His voice was not steady. It was the voice of a man who has run far enough that the breath is ahead of the words. Vescari turned. Valenti. He said it with a particular quality recognition, recalibration, and underneath it the specific tone of a man who has been waiting for this exact option to appear. You're exactly who I needed. Let her go, Damien said. I have a better proposal. Vescari stepped away from the terminal. His composure was reconstructing itself in real time, which was a thing Elena watched with the particular cold attention of someone noting that a dangerous man is becoming dangerous again. You and I both know you don't want what's in that transmission any more than I do. Your accounts are in it, your authorizations, everything you signed in the past 18 months. He spread his hands. Help me close the protocol. Get me out of this building. And you walk away clean. Your empire, your daughter. Clean. Damien looked at him. He looked at Elena. He looked at the man who represented everything he had spent 30 years building toward, the kind of power that moved through rooms without explaining itself, the kind that settled outcomes before other people knew they were in play. Elena watched his face. She had told him she didn't know if wanting to refuse was the same as refusing. Now she was about to find out. Release every ledger, Damien said. He was looking at Elena, not Vescari, when he said it. Domestic and foreign. Everything. Whatever the transmission has had mine. He reached into his coat and pulled out a drive, held it up. Farida had given it to him. Elena had not known about this. She had not planned this. This was Damien arriving at a decision she had not arranged for him and could not have arranged for him, because it was the kind of decision that only holds when nobody arranged it. He tossed the drive to the terminal floor, not to anyone, just to the floor, where it landed near the terminal base, and its contents would be picked up in the sweep. Vescari's face went very still. You'd rather burn than cooperate, he said. I'd rather be something my daughter can look at, Damien said. Even from a prison cell, Celeste moved, not toward Elena. Toward Damien fast, the weapon coming up, the movement of someone who has decided that if the plan is over, then damage control is the only remaining option. Elena moved first. She stepped directly into Celeste's path, not a tackle, not a fight, just her body in the space, her arm out, her hand catching Celeste's weapon arm at the wrist and pushing it up and sideways with the specific, unelegant leverage of someone who has no fighting training, but has the physics of the situation working for them. Because Celeste was moving fast and off balance, and Elena was standing still and planted. The weapon discharged once into the stone ceiling. The sound was enormous in the confined space. Dust fell. Elena's ears went to a high flat ringing. Celeste and Elena hit the wall together, and Celeste's arm was still up and Elena's hand was still on her wrist. And they were both on their feet, but barely, the kind of barely that is one shift of weight from the floor. Then the officers came through the shutter. They had come in from above, through the facility's roof access. She would learn later, through a route Farida had mapped, because Farida mapped everything. And they were through the shutter, and in the corridor in seconds. And it was loud, and it was close, and it was the specific chaos of a very small space, containing too many people, all of whom are moving. Elena let go of Celeste's wrist. She put both arms around her stomach. She pressed her back against the terminal wall, and she stayed there while the corridor resolved itself into the aftermath of a plan that had worked, mostly in the ways that mattered, with the deviations that happen when human beings are involved, and nothing is ever as clean as the architecture. Vescari was on the floor. His men were against the wall. Celeste was being separated from the weapon she still had not fully let go of, which required 2 officers, which was the last coherent thing Elena processed before she registered the pain. Not the low back pressure. Something different. Sharper. Specific. The kind of signal that the body sends when it is no longer making suggestions and has moved to directives. She pressed her hand against the wall. Damien was there. She didn't know when he'd crossed the corridor. She hadn't tracked it, but he was there beside her, close to his hand on her arm, the way you hold someone when you are not trying to support them but simply registering that they exist. Elena, I know, she said. You need... I know. She breathed through the contraction because that was what it was. She had no more patience for cataloging it as anything else, and she waited for it to pass, and it did not pass the way the previous ones had passed. It changed instead. Deepened. 7.5 months. 8 weeks early. Call Farida, she said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. Tell her I need a medical team at the north entrance. Now. Elena, the transmission is running, she said. The protocol worked. It's done. The investigators have what they need. She breathed again. Call Farida. Tell her now. He was already on his phone. She pressed her hand against the terminal wall, and she looked at the white light that was still transmitting, still sending, still doing the thing her father had designed it to do 30 years ago, for the person who would one day stand in this corridor and need it to work. It was working. Vescari was in handcuffs on the floor of her father's archive corridor, and the transmission was running, and the investigators had every piece of his network, and Damien had put his own drive on the floor, and Celeste was disarmed, and the plan had held. At every junction, she'd stress-tested, and at 2 she hadn't even known to test. She breathed. The contraction was not waiting for her. "Damien," she said. "I'm here," he said. "Don't let them put you in the same vehicle," she said. "Whatever happens next, you're going to need to be separated from them for processing. Tell your attorney. Make sure the disclosure package is confirmed received. Elena, you're in labor, I know." She looked at him. "Make the call. Then deal with your situation in that order." He looked at her for a moment, this woman who was contracting in a stone corridor 8 weeks early and giving him legal advice about arrest processing, and something happened in his face that she didn't have time to fully read. He made the call. The medical team arrived at the north entrance in 11 minutes. She walked out of the maintenance corridor, and through the tunnel and up the service stairs, and through the ground floor of the customs facility, on her own 2 feet, because she was not going to be carried out of a building she had walked into. Not tonight. Not after everything. Damien was beside her the whole length of it. She did not tell him to stop. Outside, the rain had come in hard off the harbor, that cold, sideways October variety that found every gap in a coat and did not apologize for it. The medical team met her at the entrance, and there was a vehicle, and there was Farida standing 10 feet away with her phone, and the particular expression of a woman who has been holding a very large plan together by force of will for 48 hours and is now watching its last piece execute. Their eyes met. Farida nodded once. Elena nodded back. She got into the medical vehicle. Damien stopped at the open door. She looked at him. He had not been invited. She had not made room. And he understood. She could see that he understood the specific mathematics of what was his to follow and what was hers to carry. "Tell the attorney," she said. "Already done," he said. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she looked forward, and the door closed, and the vehicle pulled away from the harbor into the rain-soaked city, and behind her customs facility held its secrets in stone, and inside the archive the white terminal was still transmitting. Faithfully, the way her father had designed it to, the way things hold when they are built by someone who understood that the person who would one day need it most would be someone standing alone in a room that was designed to take everything from her. She breathed through the next contraction. The vehicle moved. And somewhere ahead of her, in a hospital that smelled like antiseptic and heat, a room was being prepared for a daughter who had decided she was done waiting. Sienna Marcelli Valenti was born at 2:47 in the morning. Not quietly. Nothing about the birth was quiet, not the 11 minutes in the vehicle when the contractions were coming faster than anyone had prepared for, not the controlled urgency of the delivery team moving around Elena with the particular efficiency of people who have done this under difficult circumstances before, not the machines, not the voices giving instructions, not Elena herself, who made sounds that she did not recognize as her own sounds, and who gripped the rail of the delivery bed with both hands, and breathed the way she had been taught to breathe, and discovered that what you are taught, what your body does, are 2 separate negotiations. 31 minutes from the hospital entrance to the first cry. The cry was not small. Elena heard it and closed her eyes, and felt something leave her body that was not the child, some held thing, some compressed accumulation of the past 10 days, and the past 10 years, and the past 7.5 months, leaving all at once through a door that the cry had opened, and she lay there in the noise and the light and the smell of the delivery room, and she breathed. "She's breathing on her own," the doctor said. "Strong lungs for 32 weeks. Elena opened her eyes. They brought Sienna to her, wrapped in something white, and Elena took her with both arms and looked at her face, which was red and furious, and ancient, the way newborn faces are ancient, and she said nothing for a long moment. Then she said very quietly the name, Sienna. The baby's eyes were unfocused in the way of all new things, adjusting to the fact of existing. She moved her mouth. Her fingers were impossibly small against Elena's arm. "You came early," Elena said. "That's all right, I was ready." She was not sure that was entirely true, but she said it anyway, because some things need to be said in the direction of being true before they get there. They took Sienna to the NICU 20 minutes later. Standard protocol. For 32 weeks, the doctor explained. She would need monitoring. The lungs were good, but the weight was the question, and she would need time. Elena watched them carry her daughter out of the room and felt the specific, terrible helplessness of a mother whose child is in the hands of competent strangers, which is not the same as feeling that the child is unsafe, but is also not comfortable. She lay back. The room settled into its post-crisis quiet. A nurse asked if there was someone to call. Elena gave her Farida's number. Farida arrived at 4 a.m. and sat in the chair beside the bed and said nothing for the first 10 minutes, which was the right thing to do. She had been awake for 32 hours. It showed in the specific way exhaustion shows on people who are accustomed to managing it not collapse, but a loosening of the maintained edges, the eyes a degree slower, the posture carrying its weight differently. The transmission completed, Farida said finally. Full packet. Federal investigators have confirmed receipt. Vescari's network. All of it. The shell companies, the Lorenzo acquisition mechanism, the Orsini payments, the server that Celeste used to pull Damien's accounts. The coercion protocol logged every device in that corridor. Farida paused. Your father built something extraordinary. Yes, Elena said. He did. Celeste is in custody. Vescari is in custody. Orsini was picked up at the airport. At 11:15, he was on a flight manifest under a name that didn't match his passport. And Damien? Farida was quiet for a moment. He's been cooperating with federal processing since midnight. His attorney is managing the voluntary disclosure. The package he submitted is Elena. He gave them everything. Things we didn't even know to look for. Accounts in jurisdictions that weren't on our radar. He said he would. He did more than he said he would. Elena looked at the ceiling. How much trouble is he in? She said. Significant. The unauthorized transactions carry federal exposure. Some of it is clearly criminal. Some may be civil. It depends on how the investigation characterizes his knowledge and intent. Farida paused. His cooperation will matter. It already matters. But it won't make it disappear. No, Elena said. It won't. He's outside, Farida said. He's been in the waiting area since 1:30. I didn't tell him he could come in. I didn't tell him he couldn't. Elena looked at the window, which showed nothing. It was dark outside. The city a collection of lights without context at this hour. Sienna is in the NICU, Elena said. 8 weeks early. She's breathing on her own. They say she's strong. Farida's face did something that was not professional but was true. She's your daughter, she said. Of course she is. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. Tell him he can have 5 minutes, she said. After that, I need to sleep. Damien came in the way a person enters a room when they are not certain of their welcome, and have decided to proceed anyway, not tentatively, because he was not a tentative man, but carefully, with the specific care of someone who has learned recently that careful and careful are not synonyms and is trying to find the version that is useful rather than the version that is performance. He stopped beside the bed. He looked worse than she had ever seen him look, which was saying something given the past 10 days. There was a cut above his left eye that had been taped but not properly cleaned. He'd been in a processing facility for hours, not a hospital. His coat was still damp from the harbor rain. He had the look of a man who has spent several hours in rooms with federal investigators and has answered every question fully and is now standing in the aftermath of that. He looked at her. She's in the NICU, Elena said. 32 weeks. They say her lungs are strong. Something moved through his face, not the managed expression. The thing underneath it, which she had seen only twice 10 years of marriage, and which she recognized now as the only version of Damien Valenti that had always been real. Can I? He started. Not tonight, Elena said. Tonight is about her being stable. When she's stable, we'll discuss what visits look like and under what conditions. He nodded. That's fair, he said. It's not about fair, Elena said. It's about what she needs, which is what everything going forward will be about. I understand. She studied him, the cut above his eye, the damp coat, the hands he was holding in front of him with no particular purpose, which on Damien, who always had purpose for his hands, who used them to manage his presence the way other people used words, looked strange and undefended. You submitted more than the package, she said. Yes. Farida told me. He didn't say anything. You didn't have to go further than what you agreed to, she said. I know, why did you? He looked at the window, then back at her. Because the package was what I promised you. The rest was what I owed. Elena was quiet, and the drive, she said, in the corridor. That wasn't part of any plan. No, you came into that building when I told you not to. Yes, if you had arrived earlier, If Vescari had seen you before the protocol activated. I know, he said. I waited in the tunnel until I heard the shutter. I wasn't there to interfere with the plan. I was there because he stopped, looked at his hands. I wasn't going to let you stand in that corridor alone. Whether or not it changed anything, I wasn't going to do that. The room was quiet. It could have collapsed everything, she said. Yes, I told you specifically. I know what you told me. He met her eyes. And I'm not asking you to call it the right choice. I'm telling you it was the only one I had. She held his gaze. There was nothing she could say to that which was both honest and simple, so she said nothing. And the silence between them had the quality that silences have when two people are standing on opposite sides of something that has genuinely changed, and both of them know it. Go deal with your situation, she said finally. Talk to your attorney tonight. Sleep somewhere. Come back when they let me see her. When will that be? Tomorrow morning if everything is stable. He nodded. He started toward the door. Damien, he stopped. The drive, she said. What was on it? He turned. Everything that wasn't on the package, he said. Foreign accounts Vescari didn't know about. 3 transactions that were mine. Clearly mine. No ambiguity. He paused. Things that would have been hard to find without the drive. You handed them the case against yourself. Yes. That's a 14-month sentence minimum, she said. Possibly more. I know what it is, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Good night, Damien, she said. He left. She closed her eyes. She slept. The investigation took 11 months to fully process. Vescari's network, exposed by the archive transmission, was broader and more deeply embedded than the federal contact had anticipated. The transmission had captured device signatures, communication chains, and transaction authorizations that connected to subsidiaries in 4 countries, 2 offshore financial systems, and a logistics operation that had been running parallel to the legitimate port industry for over a decade. The case became federal in scope within the first week and international within the first month. Celeste's cooperation, when it came, arrived in the form of a plea arrangement that reduced her in exchange for testimony about operational timeline. She had been placed inside Damien's life 14 months before the gala. The relationship had been constructed and managed from the beginning as an intelligence asset. She had not, she told the investigators, anticipated developing any genuine feeling for him, which she stated not as mitigation but as a fact. She reported with the flat precision of someone trained to observe and document. The investigators noted it. It changed nothing about her sentence. Orsisny received a separate federal charge related to his facilitation of the nursery camera failure and the mailbox delivery of the photograph. His wife's consulting company was dissolved. He did not appear in court, looking the way Elena remembered him. Looking in this house competent, watchful, present. He looked diminished in the way that people look when the structure they operated inside is removed, and what remains is only the person. The council removed Damien from control of Valenti Capital in the 3rd week of the investigation. The legitimate businesses were placed under independent oversight. Patricia Cho led the oversight committee with the specific, unbothered efficiency of a woman who had been waiting for the opportunity to run something properly and intended to use it. The 1,100 employees kept their positions. The pension accounts were protected. The ports ran. Elena did not attend the council proceedings. She was in the NICU. Sienna spent 19 days there. 19 days of Elena sitting beside the incubator in the particular chair the unit kept for parents not comfortable, not uncomfortable, designed for a specific kind of sustained presence, and talking to her daughter about things that required no response. About the estate garden in October, about Marco Marcelli and what his handwriting looked like in the journals, about Port Aurelia and the harbor and the rain off the water at this time of year, about the crib she had built herself, waiting in the nursery, about everything that was going to be different from what Elena had imagined it would be, and everything that was going to be hers. Damien came on the 2nd day. He had asked first through a message sent to Farida, because he understood that the channel of communication had changed. Elena's had said yes. He came in the morning and sat in a second chair that the nurse brought without being asked, because nurses in NICUs have seen enough variation in family structure to bring a second chair without commentary. He did not try to hold Sienna. She was not yet ready for extended handling. The doctors had been clear about that. He sat beside the incubator and he looked at her through the clear wall with the expression of a man encountering something that has reorganized his understanding of scale. He did not say anything for a long time. "She has your hands," he said finally. Elena looked at Sienna's hands, which were curled in the particular way of all newborns, the fingers slightly loosened in sleep. "My father's hands," Elena said. Damien looked at her, then back at Sienna. "Yes," he said, "that too." He came every morning after that, for the 19 days, and he stayed for however long Elena indicated was appropriate, and when she indicated it was time to go, he went, and he did not push for more than he was given, and he did not perform gratitude for what he was given. He just came and sat and looked at his daughter through the clear wall and said the things that came to him naturally, which were quiet things, small things, observations about the light in the room, the sound of the machines, whether Sienna appeared to be dreaming. Elena listened to him, talked to her daughter, and thought about what it meant that the version of Damien she was watching was the version she had never seen in 10 years of marriage. Unhurried, without agenda, present without purpose. She thought about what it costs a person to lose everything in order to find out who they are without it. She did not say this to him. She filed it. Sienna came home on a Tuesday in November in a car seat Elena had installed herself in a car driven by Antonio, who had worked for the Marcelli family for 22 years and who did not say anything when he saw her come through the hospital exit, carrying the baby, except to hold the door open and check the car seat twice before he started the engine. Asena sat in the back with Sienna in the seat beside her, and she watched the city go past the windows, and she felt the particular, almost unbearable lightness of leaving a building with something you entered it without. The nursery was exactly as she had left it, the pale walls, the folded things in the dresser, the crib she had built herself. She laid Sienna in it and stood beside it for a long time, one hand on the rail, the same hand she had pressed against the terminal wall in the archive corridor, 2 weeks earlier, the same hand she had pressed against her father's cabinet the night of the gala when she had opened it and understood what she was being trusted with. The same hand. She was still herself. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in December, 2 weeks before Sienna's due date would have been. Sienna sat across from her attorney in his office with the documents in front of her, and she signed her name where she was directed to sign it. And at the end, she wrote Elena Marcelli in the designated field rather than Elena Valenti and the attorney, who had known her father and had represented her without a word of unsolicited advice, throughout everything, said nothing. Simply countersigned, notarized, filed, she drove home. She sat in the library, her father's chair, his desk, his journals stacked on the corner, and she breathed. She had been married for 10 years. She had been Elena Marcelli for her entire life. The second felt more accurate. In January, Damien was sentenced. 14 months, federal facility, with credit for the voluntary disclosure and cooperation that had substantially accelerated the Viscari prosecution. His attorney had argued for less. The judge had considered the argument and had not found it compelling enough to go below 14 months, which was the number Elena had told him to expect and which he had accepted when she told him. He called her the night before he reported. She answered. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," he said. I needed you to know that I understand what I'm going in for. Not the charges, what I actually did." She was sitting in the library. Sienna was asleep in the nursery above. The house was quiet in the particular way it had become quiet since November, not the tense quiet of the weeks before the gala, not the held-breath quiet of the investigation, but an actual quiet, a room that belongs to you quiet. "I know you do," she said. "I'm going to write to Sienna," he said. "Not right away. When she's old enough to receive something. And when I'm out, I'd like to earn whatever place you decide is appropriate. In her life. No more than that. That's what we'll discuss when the time comes," she said. "Yes." Pause. "Elena, what?" "I'm sorry for the gala," he said. "Not for the strategic reasons. Not because of what it exposed about Viscari. For you. Standing there. What I made you stand there and receive in front of 400 people." Another pause. "I'm sorry for that specifically." She held the phone. "I know," she said. "Good night, Damien." She hung up. She sat in the library for a while after that, in the company of her father's handwriting on the shelves, and the rain against the window, and the particular silence of a house where a sleeping child is the loudest thing present. She thought about the night of the gala. She thought about the champagne glass on the marble floor and the 4-3-foot screen, and 400 people choosing not to breathe. She thought about what she had felt standing there, but she had not fully let herself feel until now, because there had been no room for it during the investigation, no room during the birth, no room during the 19 days in the NICU, no room during the divorce proceedings. She had been carrying it in the same interior pocket where she'd carried the silver key, held close, protected, waiting for the moment when the plan was done and the coast was sufficiently clear. She felt it now. It was not as large as she had expected. Not smaller, she would not claim it was smaller than it was, because that would be dishonest in the way that self-protective narration is always dishonest. It was simply the size of a real thing rather than the size of the imagined version, which is always either larger or smaller, but never the same. She had been publicly discarded by a man she had loved in front of the people who populated their world while carrying his child. That had happened. It would always have happened. There was no resolution of it, no retroactive protection, no architecture her father could have designed that would have prevented those 400 people from seeing what they saw. She had walked out. She had done everything that needed doing. And she was sitting here now, in her father's chair, with her daughter asleep above her, and her name restored, and the company protected, and the archive's transmission delivered, and Vescari in a federal case that would take years to fully prosecute, and the silver key on the desk in front of her. The key was done. She picked it up. She held it in her palm and looked at it, the etched serial number, the worn silver of something handled many times by a man who is no longer living. She thought about Marco Marcelli, who had built a vault inside a port facility 30 years ago for a person he knew would need it, and who had died before he knew whether she would find it in time. She thought about the letter. Someone has mistaken your silence for surrender. She had not, she realized, been silent. She had been patient, which was different, which was the thing her father had understood that most people, looking at a quiet woman, never bothered to distinguish. She set the key down. 14 months passed. Elena rebuilt the company into something smaller, which meant something real. She eliminated the operations that could not survive transparency, the ones that had existed in the shadow of the Valenti name and the Vescari network, and the accumulated leverage of 2 decades of deals made in rooms where accountability was considered optional. What remained was leaner and could be examined and held up to the light without apology. She hired Patricia Cho as the permanent independent chair of the oversight board. She converted the security funds that had been seized in the investigation into a restitution trust for the people who had been harmed by the port network's less legitimate operations over the years, the workers, the small operators, the people who had lost bids or contracts or licenses to a system that had been tilted against them before they walked in the door. She did not announce this publicly. She simply did it. Former employees of Valenti Capital, who had known nothing of the fraud, kept their positions and their pensions, and, eventually, their new employment contracts under the restructured entity. Most of them continued working as if the name on the door had changed and everything important had stayed the same, which was roughly accurate. Damien wrote to Sienna every Sunday. The letters arrived through Elena's attorney at first, then directly, after the first 6 months, when a routing that went through official channels was no longer legally necessary, and Elena gave him the estate's address and said he could write directly. The letters were nothing like what she would have expected him, to write no business language, no authority, no attempt to shape perception. He wrote about the facility's garden, which he had been given permission to work in 2 hours a day, about a book he was reading on the history of harbors, about a particular bird that appeared on the facility grounds every morning at the same time, and that he had named without being able to explain why it merited naming. He wrote about learning to bake bread, which went badly for several months and then slowly went better. Elena read every letter before filing them in the box she kept for Sienna, because Sienna was not old enough to receive them, and because that was the agreement, and because, if she was honest, she read them for herself too, in the library at night, after Sienna was asleep, as a kind of ongoing study in what a man becomes when everything he constructed his identity around has been removed. What Damien became, in the letters, was someone who noticed small things. That was not what she had expected. On Sienna's 2nd birthday, he came to the estate. He had been released 6 weeks earlier and had taken an apartment on the other side of the city, a deliberate distance, chosen himself, not mandated. He arrived carrying a wooden horse he had made in the facility's woodworking program, and one leg of it was slightly shorter than the other three, which he had attempted to compensate for by sanding, and had only partially succeeded. Sienna ran into the garden when she saw him. She was 2. She had no framework for the past 2 years. She had the framework of the Sunday letters that Elena had read aloud to her since she was old enough to sit still, and the framework of the one supervised visit at the facility that Elena had arranged at 18 months, and the framework of the particular name Papa that she had encountered in the letters before she had a face to attach it to. "Papa," she said, with the complete confidence of a child who has decided something. He crouched down in the garden, and she put both arms around his neck, and he held her with the careful hands of someone afraid to hold too tight. Elena watched from the terrace. She watched him set the wooden horse on the garden stone and show Sienna its slightly uneven leg, and she watched Sienna immediately try to ride it. And she watched Damien catch her before she toppled, and then set her back on her feet and explain something in the patient tone she had not known he had, about how the horse was for looking at more than riding. Sienna disagreed. He let her. At dinner, which Elena had made herself pasta, straightforward, nothing requiring a production, Damien ate at the kitchen table and did not try to behave as if he belonged there. He helped Sienna with her fork. He answered questions she hadn't asked him. He was quiet when there was nothing to say, and said things when there were things to say, and the distinction was new enough in him that Elena noticed it the way you notice a specific quality of light after a season of the same gray weather. After dinner, he helped clear the table. He stood at the counter and he said, carefully, looking at the dish in his hand rather than at her, "I want you to know that I understand what good behavior here is and what it isn't. I'm not doing any of this to rebuild what I destroyed. I know that's not what this is." Elena dried a dish. "Good," she said. "I'm not going to ask you to wait for anything," he said, "or to forgive anything, or to..." He stopped. "Set the dish down. I just want to keep coming. Whatever that means on your terms, for Sienna." Elena put the towel on the counter. She had thought about this moment abstractly, the way you think about things that are still approaching what she would feel, what she would say, whether the 2 years in the investigation and the archive corridor and the 19 days in the NICU and the letters about bread and a bird would add up to something she could name. They did not add up to forgiveness exactly. They added up to something more complicated and more honest than that, which was the recognition that the man standing at her kitchen counter had become someone different from the man who had stood beneath chandeliers and made a choice about her in front of 400 people, and that the difference was real, and that real differences are real, regardless of what you decide to do with them. "Stay for the bedtime story," she said. "Sienna wants you to read the one about the harbor." He looked at her. "That's all it is," she said, "tonight." "I know," he said, "that's enough." He was not saying it to manage her perception of him. She could tell the difference now, had learned it over 2 years of the letters and the supervised visit, and the 6 weeks of knowing he was out, and choosing a distance he hadn't been told to choose. He was saying it because it was true that the boundary of one evening in a kitchen and one bedtime story was genuinely enough for a man who had spent 14 months learning to need less. She left him in the kitchen. She went upstairs. She stood in the doorway of the nursery, not the same as it had been in October 2 years ago, changed in small ways that a room changes when a person is actually living in it. Toys on the floor, a drawing taped to the wall, the crib replaced by a small bed, and she listened to Sienna in her bath, to the ordinary noise of a child who does not know yet that ordinary noise is the thing that costs the most to arrive at. She heard Damien's footsteps on the stairs. She heard him stop in the doorway of the bathroom and say something that made Sienna laugh, a real laugh, 2-year-old and complete. She went to the library. She sat in her father's chair. The house moved around her the way houses do when they are full, and she sat with her coffee, and she looked at the silver key on the desk, which she had been looking at for 2 years, which had done the thing it was designed to do, which could now be simply an object rather than a mechanism. She picked it up. She held it for a moment. She opened the desk drawer and placed the key inside, and closed the drawer, and sat for a while in the particular quiet of having put something down that you have been carrying for a long time. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning, not a storm, just the first small announcement, the kind of snow that doesn't stick, but reminds you that it will. She could see it against the window in the light from the street, coming down slow and without urgency, the way things come when they are not trying to prove anything. Years later, people who had been at the Valenti anniversary gala still talked about what had happened that night. It had been the kind of public drama that the world of senators and bankers and old money treated the way they treated all ruptures, with the combination of sustained interest and performed discretion that is the particular social currency of people who have agreed among themselves that they're too sophisticated to be entertained by other people's catastrophes, while being very clearly entertained by them. They talked about Damien's speech. They talked about Elena walking out. They said she had lost everything that night, which was the thing people say about a woman who has been publicly discarded, because it is the version of the story that fits the shape they have already decided it should take. They were wrong. What Elena had lost that night was something she had been spending herself maintaining for 10 years, the work of making a broken thing appear whole. The particular exhausting labor of a woman who has been keeping her own counsel so long that the counsel has become the only company she keeps. She had walked out of the ballroom without begging. She had not run. She had not dissolved. She had touched the life moving beneath her heart and said the truest thing available to her in that moment and put one foot in front of the other until she was in the rain, in the car, going home. She had done everything that followed, and she was here. She was Elena Marcelli. Her daughter was being read a story about a harbor by a man who was learning, late and at great cost, what it means to be present without taking. The snow was coming down outside the library window. She drank her coffee. She did not need anything else from this particular night. She had everything she had built. It was enough. It was in fact exactly enough.